Hi everyone, it's Ajanette, and the last I left off we were talking about brain development. Specifically, we were going over the structure of a neuron, where we discussed the fact that neurons are not actually connected to each other. I don't think I mentioned this, but I'll tell you now. They're not connected to each other. They're close to one another, and the space in between neurons is what we call a synapse. So that gap is the synapse or synaptic gap. And so neurons actually have appendages that pick up those messages that are passed in those gaps, and that's what we call a dendrite. They take those messages to the cell body, it processes it, and then it passes the message along away from the cell body along the axon. Along the axon there's this myelination that is occurring, and this myelination allows the electrical impulse that passes down the neuron to go swiftly and efficiently, just like a water on a water slide. Myelination is an important part of physical functioning. In fact, some diseases and disorders are attributed to the loss of myelination throughout the body. We do have myelination occur significantly in fetal development, particularly that third period. But then we also have it continue to occur throughout our lifespan. So it's a really critical part of healthy nervous system functioning. We also should talk about at brain development, a massive amount of what we call synaptogenesis occurs, where there's this creation of synaptic and dendritic connections. It's kind of like starting out on social media. Maybe it's just you and a couple of your family members, and then you make connections, and then you continue to make connections, and then it becomes this very intense interconnected network. And each of this network expansion represents a connection between neurons. So we go through these bursts of synaptogenesis, or the creation of synapses, followed by pruning. Just like we might go out and spring clean and say, okay, I haven't worn these shoes in a long time, so I throw them out. Our brain engages in a similar process where it goes and prunes away neurons that aren't actively communicating with one another. So I just want you to keep this brain development in mind, because as this is occurring, when an infant's first born, it has very few connections. And then every time it's exposed to something in the environment, it makes more dense and active connections with neurons around it, so that it can process some understanding of its environmental experience. And that underlying brain development is directly related to outward physical abilities and skills, as well as outward cognitive abilities that we can see. One such area is in the area of motor development. When we're first born, there's very few connections, and all of our motor and livelihood is based on reflexes. Reflexes don't require any cerebral understanding of the event. We just do them naturally, and there's usually some survival or adaptive value. Your chart has a wonderful list, your textbook has a wonderful chart that lists out all the different reflexes. And the most important thing is the sucking reflex, which allows the child to eat and sustain life. The rooting reflex is if you touch the baby's cheek, it will turn its head toward the touch and it will begin sucking. And then grasping and holding on, especially when it's feeling insecure, that's a critical part of survival as well. And then motor development, as far as our voluntary movement, it follows a very consistent sequence and pattern of development. And this is across the world. All babies universally go through this period. First they hold their chin up, then they start to roll over, then they can sit up by themselves, first with support, then alone. Then they can start to stand, pull themselves up and stand on holding to something. Then they begin to walk while they're holding. Then they stand completely independently, begin to walk alone, and then later they climb steps. So pretty consistent. Just FYI, physical motor development has no correlation with intellect, even though we like to say, oh, my baby's rolling over faster than yours, so my baby's smarter. My baby's walking sooner, so my baby's smarter. No, those are just parents getting into those debates unnecessarily. Fine motor development, however, is linked and correlated with IQ, so just to keep in mind. Sensory development, although they do have well-developed sense of touch and they can feel pain and pressure when they're first born, they have very well-developed sense of smell. Studies have been shown that infants will turn toward a breast pad that contains their mother's milk, so they recognize smells right after birth. And their hearing actually develops in utero, just like they can recognize the smell of their mother's breast milk, they can recognize their mother's voice as well. Not so much success in recognizing their father's voice, but it is distorted through all that amniotic fluid as well. And then additionally, they might have a preference for music and stories. Their vision, however, is the least well-developed sense. It doesn't start to take shape until about a year to 2 years of age when they start to develop normal vision. Otherwise, it is very much blurry, and given that I wear glasses, I kind of empathize with that. And then their perception, so sensory really relates to our physical ability to detect sensory stimuli, and our perception is our mental understanding of those images that are formed. And we actually have infants studied by putting them in these looking chambers where they are restrained, and they can't move right or left. They're restrained. They can only look at an object in front of them. And we put stimuli in front of them. We measure their sucking reflex. Sometimes we'll take some physiological measurements to look at their heart rate, their respiration rate. And we look at how quickly do they habituate from objects, or how long do they pay attention, and then it becomes a habit. They get bored and they look away. And that's what habituation is. You become bored or desensitized to the information. Dishabituation is when you have stopped your boredom and you've re-engaged your attention. And so we look at preferences, and they do show signs that they do prefer complex objects in front of them rather than simple, theoretically because they elicit intellectual engagement. Here's a looking paradigm that they're in a looking chamber. And then they show a preference for faces, same exact symbols, but mixed up. And they'll look at this face more readily than they'll look at this face. Okay, so now I'm going to move on and talk about some physical changes in adolescence. They do go through puberty during adolescence, at which time their primary and secondary sex characteristics develop. Primary in terms of organs that are directly related to reproduction, secondary not so much. So our pubic hair, arm hair, that's secondary sex characteristic. Our development of our penis and our changes in our vagina, as well as our uterus and ovaries, those are all directly related to reproduction. Menarche is actually the onset of puberty, and spermarche is the onset of ejaculation, and that's kind of what we consider to be the peak of puberty. And if you look at it, females are typically starting a little bit younger than males, on average about 6 months to a year from the period. The average rate of menarche is about 11.5, 12. The average age of spermarche is about 12.5 to 13. So again, just about a year, 6 months to a year different. We go through additional physical changes, pretty significant, and menopause, where now it's the decline or cessation of menarche, and it can be influenced by social pressures. In our culture, we do experience some pretty severe symptomology, including hot flashes and night sweats and nightmares and irritability. Those seem to be higher in our culture than in other cultures. Asians don't seem to experience that culture. We don't know if it's a social issue. There's also some hormonal factors related to diet. Although men don't stop producing sperm at any time throughout their lives on a normative basis, there is a male climacteric where it's a decline in sperm production. So they still continue to produce sperm, but just not as much and not as healthy. And so primary aging is talking about kind of our natural, gradual decline. It occurs based on just the cellular programming that occurs, that cells are supposed to age and die. And then there is a theory that suggests that just damage might occur based on lifestyle choices. We refer to that as secondary aging, and that's related to disease or misuse or neglect. So Mike always says it's not the age, it's the mileage. Secondary aging reflects the mileage. Primary aging reflects just the normal progression of getting older. On average, our lifespan is 110 to, I shouldn't say on average. The maximum lifespan is 110 to 120 years. I have a friend whose grandma just passed away and she was over 110 years of age. So kind of know your family history. It could happen to you. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here and then start a new video on cognitive development when we come back together.